For those of you just joining us, welcome. Our topic today is 3 strategies for serving enterprise customers. It's going to be a great show. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Evan Rice and Matt Robison. Evan has spent the last 3 years as the VP of Sales and Marketing for Rev.io, where he has supported numerous organizations as they grow their upmarket and multi-location business. Matt is the VP of Client Success here. Matt has crafted numerous support teams to increase client retention, provide fantastic customer experiences, and reduce churn. Now, I'll turn it over to Evan.
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, perfect. So just want to get started off. We'll talk a little bit about our agenda and what we're going to cover today. So really we're focusing on the enterprise or major account segment. A little bit of background, Rev.io, we service communications and IoT service providers, and we have approximately 100 service provider clients. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the experience and what we see of the opportunity in the market and what's happening with those service providers that are taking advantage of the enterprise segment. And we'll talk a little bit about some growth strategy and ultimately how you can attract an upmarket customer. We're also going to talk about the type of technology that needs to be implemented to win and support that segment. And we'll go through some specific needs and requirements that segment has. Then I'll turn it over to Matt, who's going to talk to us about really the customer care and support strategy needed to retain those types of clients. And then we'll wrap up by talking a little bit about some of the functionality around how to gain business intelligence as well as how to provide that type of visibility to that customer segment, ultimately in an effort to retain and win those types of accounts. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the market for enterprise customers. All right, so again, when we really look at the communications market as a whole, last year it was a $363 billion industry, and this is obviously continuing to grow year after year. The need for data connectivity, voice services, unified communications, cloud offerings is certainly not slowing down. This is a trend that is continuing to grow year after year. When you really look at the enterprise segment, when you look at the upmarket customer, they're constantly under pressure to do more with less, to reduce IT budgets, ultimately become more efficient with the types of services that they're consuming and get more output out of an ever-shrinking budget, right? So what does that mean? And that means you have to have a concerted strategy in order to separate yourself rather than just providing the same services that they're purchasing today. If that's the strategy that you have, there's going to be constant pressure for price compression. It's going to be a pricing battle. So what we highly advise our clients to do is constantly evaluate new service offerings in an attempt to separate yourself from your competition. And one segment that we see a lot of growth in particular, that's getting a lot of attention from the upmarket customer, are mobility and IoT offerings, right? So just a couple things to look at. By midpoint of last year, there were about 30 million connected devices out in the market. There's different segments that we're seeing our service provider clients really focus on our traditional mobility, whether that be data connectivity, wireless backup for failover for data circuits, starting to see fleet management, asset management, really providing applications on top of the data connectivity that they're already providing their customers is a key way to separate yourself, in particular in this upmarket segment that we're focused on today. The growth in this area is significant. So when we really look at IT or IoT as a whole, when we look at the IoT industry, it's a $150 billion market, and that's estimated to grow to, over $500 billion market by 2025. And, when we look at this, it's 1.6 million consumers by 2020. But the real power of IoT is the fact that you're not limited to the consumer, you're limited to the device, and it's really going to be a significant amount of device proliferation. And this is a real opportunity, again, to separate yourself from other providers in the space by expanding your offerings. So we wanted to look at, of our approximately 100 service provider clients, those that are focused on what we consider an enterprise customer segment. We'll talk a little bit about what that profile looks like in a minute. But about 40 or 40% of them are focused on that type of segment. And what we're seeing in terms of, hey, why should I care, right? Why should I go up market? Is those companies that are succeeding and winning and retaining those enterprise customers grow at double the rate of those that aren't focused on it. So certainly, that's the why, right? Is when you focus on these, you're going to grow at double the rate as if you don't. So let's look at, what does that customer look like? So what we consider an enterprise customer is doing north of $5,000 a month in communication spend. They average across that segment approximately 50 locations. So you're getting a geographically distributed customer. You've got a dynamic environment where they have a lot of locations, and ultimately, that means there's a lot of change going on in that environment. They have new employees coming on regularly. They're changing their office setup. So what does that lead to? That leads to, a lot of change orders. That leads to a lot of complexity. That leads to a lot of support calls to find out what's the status of those changes, when are new services going to be up and running. And so ultimately that leads to a higher touch, higher support customer and a higher cost customer if you don't have the right tools in place. They also have a significant P&L structure when you start looking at the fact that they have regional offices, divisional offices. You have a CFO that wants to have a holistic view of the company. They may have different billing structures where you have regional offices that want to receive a bill for 10 locations of the 50, but then the corporate office wants to have visibility to that whole structure. That creates a lot of complexity in the ability to provide that transparency to that customer. We're also seeing a significant trend in the industry from a traditional IT or network cost as a single cost center that gets reallocated back to the business just as a centralized cost. There's now a transition and a move towards the concept of chargeback or showback. And what that is that's taking the spend, which traditionally is paid for by a central location, but saying what portion of that spend really allocates back to those individual P&L structures that we just talked about, right? The divisional manager of California that has 10 locations of those 50, he spent $2,000 of the $5,000 versus the regional manager in Boston who has the same number of locations who only spent $1,000, right? And how do we reallocate that back as a company to make sure that we're providing visibility and that we're gaining budget from the right areas when services need to be expanded, right? So that's an ever-growing need inside of this customer segment. And the ability to address that and provide that type of functionality provides a separating factor. The last piece is that when you look at geographically distributed customers and you're talking about 50 plus locations, those are going to be spread out oftentimes across the country, which means service areas are not always consistent. So these types of customers are traditionally purchasing from multiple service providers. What happens with that is now they have disparate billing, they have multiple sources that they need to compare, and expense management becomes challenging for them. So let's look at some of the challenges that our service providers and that service providers in the market in general are going to have in winning and retaining these types of segments. So, again, they're very profitable segment. It's a highly attractive segment. We saw the proof in the pudding that 2x growth if you're effective in this customer segment. But again, they're going to have complex support requirements. They have dynamic environments. They're going to have a higher touch required. They also have multiple locations that are constantly changing with moves, adds, changes, so the risk for billing errors becomes exponentially higher. And because this is an attractive segment, there's a significant amount of competition. There's multiple providers vying for that business. Everyone wants those accounts. So the requirement to separate yourself and really distinguish your service offering from the competitors outside of just price compression becomes that much more important. So how are these service providers, rather, how are these customers solving these challenges today? Again, we talked about the fact they've got multiple locations, they have complex P&L structures, they're buying from multiple providers, and they really have the challenge of comparing and managing that spend. So many of them are going to third parties and they're implementing telecom expense management solutions. That can be expensive. They can range from 0.5 to 1.5 or over 1% of the total communications budget of that customer. And really what that's allowing them to do is get detailed reporting and understand where that billing is coming from and allocating that back to the business effectively. They're able to do comparison month over month so that they really understand variances in their billing, and they're able to have effective truth in billing. They're managing and they're seeing an inventory of all of their services. They want to understand everything that they're purchasing from every provider, where are those services located, so that they can effectively manage and make sure that they're shutting down unused services. And ultimately, it's also allowing them to more effectively manage their suppliers, right? So this is a third-party solution that many of these customers are going out and seeking. If you can start to bring in some of these tools and provide that type of functionality, is really a separating factor from competition in the marketplace. So we want to talk about that a little bit, which is what are some of the right technologies that you need to be able to deliver to win and support these types of customers. So beginning with the core profile that we talked about, which is the fact that they have many locations. Again, on average across our customer base, we see that their customers have about 50 locations each. So you now have complex hierarchies that you need to manage internally so that you understand the structure of that account. But it's also critical that you provide that visibility back out to those customers. Last year, when you look at a Forrester study that came out last year, was really the inflection point where consumers as a whole would rather self-serve than reach someone on the phone to resolve an issue for them, right? So putting this type of functionality in place to be able to see parent-child accounts, be able to see related accounts that are both receiving their own statements, maybe the same customer, maybe divisions that are separated, but ultimately you need to be able to see that relationship so that you can service and understand that account. And then for the customer who has those multiple P&L levels, they need to be able to provide that information in context back to their business internally. Right, so no matter how complex, they need to quickly be able to drill into those different levels, see the data in terms of billing, orders, ticketing, services, everything that we talked about that they're attempting to solve with telecom expense management solutions. If you can provide that visibility internally, you're going to more effectively support that account. And when you can provide that visibility externally to your customer, now that's a real separating factor that becomes a part of your offering and makes that account extremely sticky. Billing, we said, was a challenge, right? When you look at all of those locations and the complexity of these types of accounts and the fact that services are going to be changing often, having a robust automated platform that is able to consolidate orders, billing, usage, and tie all that together and eliminate manual entry to be able to provide customers clear, accurate billing is obviously critical as you go to any customer, but when you go up market, they become exponentially more demanding. And again, really the ability to provide that visibility on demand for them to see that information is really critical, right? We also want them to be able to access different levels of their organization and assign responsibilities out so that, again, the divisional manager of California only sees his data. He doesn't need to see what's going on in Boston or on the East Coast, right? Also the ability to export that in multiple formats, whether that's PDF, Excel for those that want to do pivot tables and manage their own data or feed that information into other systems or other reports, are all consistent needs that we're hearing from our service providers to support the enterprise customer segment. Okay, we talked about the dynamic environment. So there are going to be a consistent changes. There's going to be regular orders that go on, new service, new locations that open up, changes to existing locations. So what that leads to is a high volume of support calls and inquiries to understand, where are those orders in process, when will they be complete. So to be able to, again, push that visibility down and provide self-service is an expectation that the enterprise customer segment has, right? So putting in a technology that allows you to provide visibility that ties in with your back-end systems, that when an order is created, that visibility shows up to the customer, that when a circuit delivery date is confirmed, that information gets pushed out with an email notification, as well as that there's a consolidated place for that customer to go pull that. Ultimately, what that's going to do is help eliminate some of that added support and really make it much more cost effective to be able to win and support that business, because you can push that responsibility down to the customer and give them the visibility that they need to really manage that process themselves. The same is true for support and service tickets, right? Customers are going to have issues. No one is perfect. They're going to have questions. So how do you provide a consolidated way for a complex account that has users all across the country to be able to see how are you serving them, right? And to be able to have their IT organization manage those service requests that they're receiving from their customers, which are ultimately the field locations, to be able to manage that in a consolidated way, right? To be able to provide self-service and the type of visibility, to be able to submit issues online, track the progress and resolution of those issues, see a general summary of everything that has happened with their account, and ultimately be able to drill down into details and communicate with you. And for you to have the same view that your customer has is really critical as well, right? So to be able to, when a customer care rep is on the phone with someone who's trying to get an issue resolved, to make sure that you're looking at the same information really presents a cohesive experience that instills a lot of confidence with that customer. So another key factor is just with the modern consumer experience, right? The proliferation of cloud applications and cloud services in our day-to-day lives has changed the expectation for what all of us expect in terms of a user experience. So the days of the client server, I need to be in the office at a terminal to access information, that expectation is truly gone, right? So this is really a two-pronged factor here in terms of your agility and your flexibility to be able to support a customer that is high demand, right? Oftentimes we're on the road, we're traveling, needing to be able to access customer information readily and quickly is hugely important, but also the ability to grant our customers the access to their information from anywhere at any time, right? Again, that concept of self-service often happens after business hours, and the ability to grant your customers access to their information from anywhere, when and where they want it, is really critical to provide a modern experience. And again, the ability to demonstrate that in the sale is what will help separate you from other providers and ultimately will allow you to win that business, and then providing that functionality ongoing is what keeps the experience at a level that they demand so that you retain them. So I want to break there. I want to turn it over to Matt Robison, who is our VP of Client Success. He leads our support organization and our enablement organization. So every day he is working with our service providers in addition to our largest clients. So I'll turn that over to him to talk a little bit about the different support strategies to effectively serve the upmarket segment.
Yep. Thank you, Evan, and thank you everyone for attending today. We sincerely appreciate it. As Evan mentioned, I'm our VP of Client Success, and so these are topics I've thought a lot about over the years. Today, I want to spend some time, maybe change gears a little bit, and talk about the life cycle of once you sign these customers, and so or multiple customers. So just to get started, as a kind of reference point, I wanted to communicate that a really significant portion of our client base actually fit into this category. So, we've segmented our customers, as I think most organizations do, and we have a subset of enterprise or strategic customers that, while our services may vary slightly from yours, I believe that many of the characteristics in terms of how you need to service them and some of the topics you need to think about, that we'll share a lot in common. So just as a quick statistic, to maybe prove that point out a little bit, our average enterprise customers create 23 tickets per month with, in a particular month, one hitting 65. So just to contrast those against our commercial clients, that average is 5. So, and when we look at the data for support calls, really that holds up as well. So we're talking about an average of 5 times the support to bring on and manage one of these upmarket customers. So I think that really sets the table for needing to have some thoughts about really kind of 3 different categories. So how do you prepare for that reality? I really tend to think about it in 3 categories. We've got your team, and the process infrastructure. I'll use those terms interchangeably. And then measurement. Just starting with the team, first I would say, take a hard look at the makeup of your team. Is there someone that you immediately have in mind for this role inside the organization? And when I say role, I want to elaborate a little bit. It doesn't have to be a role, but I certainly think it has to be a focus for someone as you sign the first one or as you sign the first couple. I think the potential for business as usual could lead to really just not meeting the expectations. So, I would challenge everyone to, in advance of bringing these types of customers on, really match your talent and experience with them. And that's really for a few different reasons. I think that when you reach a steady state with some of these clients, you may have the ability to kind of hand it down to the next team member and continue on. But initially, you're going to need someone that acts without asking, that reads between the lines, that really knows your business, that solves problems creatively, and ultimately gives some concrete process to gaps that this new client may leave in the existing process. I suspect some of you on the phone may be thinking, well, right now that's me, and I certainly get that. But presumably, if this becomes a meaningful part of your business, it would warrant, promotions or potentially bringing in additional help to provide that level of support. The next major point on this slide that I would talk a little bit about is I would involve the support team as early in the process as you possibly can. I think in certain instances that can mean pre-sale. I think, a number of enterprise customers who are making the type of financial and time commitment to engaging with your organization like to get a look into the service organization that they will eventually live with, for the duration of the relationship. But even if not, I think getting them involved post-contract signing and getting them the ability to see as much of the historical information, it's going to give them that permanent perspective going forward on how to service the relationship. So I would revisit the entry points of when you bring that particular support representative into the process to service these type of customers. Kind of on the next slide here, I want to talk about a couple of different things. Customer experience is a term I'm sure many of you will have heard, will hear, and I want to be careful to distinguish and point this out that customer experience and support are 2 very different things. Ultimately, to me, customer experience is something that really permeates across the organization. So this is every touch point your client may have, from your website, your emails, automated process, service delivery, installation, all the different ways that you're going to be interacting post-contract. And I would make sure that the entire organization is oriented around the idea that this customer is different. And I think that they know, and then I would ensure they know a few facts about the customer. This is absolutely going to positively influence, those touch points and creating a positive customer experience beyond just supporting the client. So that's a concept that I would encourage, everyone to think about. And I would absolutely guard against the idea that, oh, this is something operations or service will handle. Because, ultimately, I think when those type of thought processes exist, the client is going to experience it, and they're not going to feel that positive, more unified customer experience across their, interaction with your organization. So the next two bullets could really go in either order. Enterprise customers, if for no other reason than by virtue of their financial commitment to your organization, are going to expect higher levels of service. So, there may be some organizations out there, some of you on this call, that have reached the nirvana of customer experience, but I suspect that most of us would identify areas in the business that we feel like we can do better. So before, during, and after bringing on a customer of this type, I would start thinking about what parts of your process will need to be revisited. I suspect if you asked yourself that question, many of you know already what it is. If not, absolutely investigate that, because you want to look for areas of interaction that may potentially break, or there are gaps with the change in expectations that these clients will invariably have. The next topic I would talk about is you want to be careful, I think, bringing on a customer of this size, that it remains a positive endeavor for the organization. To the extent that we don't do some of the things that we talked about initially by pairing our best talent or identifying areas in process that need to be improved, it can lead to chaos inside the organization. It can take something that is, a very positive growth area of the business, and it can turn it into a negative. So I think the more proactive that you are in building repeatable processes that hold up against the change in expectations will go a long way towards keeping the organization excited about bringing on additional customers of this nature. The last part I want to talk about is the proactive element of this. And so proactive support is an area I have to be careful with. It's something I'm very passionate about, and so it's a process I would think a lot about, and I'll give you guys some examples of what I mean. The first kind of thought I would give you is, support tickets are often considered, meters or counters of problems. And I think a mind shift around that is important to say, they're really opportunities, and they're opportunities to leave either a bad, good, or neutral impression on the client. So, I think thinking a lot about making sure you use those as opportunities to go above and beyond is going to make an impact on that client. And then kind of extending that further into thinking about being proactive, I would design opportunities to be aggressive about seeking out ways to interact beyond trouble tickets. So instead of just purely reacting to what's inbound, talk to your account manager, talk to your support representatives about seeking out opportunities to understand their business, to understand their 3, 6, and 9-month objectives. I would suggest maybe more tactically adding Google alerts for these type of customers so that you're aware of the things that are impacting their business. There's any number of ideas along these lines, but I would say take the action of going a step further than just being really reactive, and stay involved in the account. That's something that ultimately builds the relationship and will pay dividends long down the road. And then kind of last point I mentioned is, measurement. So I think it's really important that if you don't have it in place already, that you establish a clear set of expectations. Often those take the form of SLAs. For anybody not familiar, service level agreements. Whether this is contractual or not, it's essentially what you're setting as the expectations for clients. I will respond to you within X days. I will give resolution within Y days. It'll take us this long for this type of request. It will take us that long for this type of request. So I would make sure that those are set up. I would make sure that they are measured and inspected often. I would make sure that you're able to report on them. And when you don't meet them, I would be candid and, have that be part of a routine dialogue with the client so that certainly they understand that you internally are thinking a lot about the expectations that they have and attempting your best to meet them. So, the last thing I want to talk about outside of measurement, I think I've said that twice now, but I have one more additional point, is, churn. So a lot of the things I think that I talked about can be tied together with the concepts of around churn. Is why do we do this? Why do we go to such extent with enterprise customers? I think for two reasons. One, you can use the opportunity for revisiting process, for matching, best employees with customers, for getting measurement system in place to improve your overall support, which will obviously have an uplift on churn. But then enterprise customers themselves tend to be stickier relationships. And, there's a couple of different sources that talk about this, and it will vary by industry. But organizations that are able to bring on customers and then have them not only have recurring revenue streams and continue to purchase the services they have in the past, but to add to those services, those organizations tend to be valued at 4 to 5 times more than their competitors who don't have that. So this idea of net retention and land and expand, or growing your base, are all concepts that I think can be very, very valuable and create a lot of value for the organization. So those were all the comments I had. Certainly thank you for participating today, and I'll turn it back over to Evan.
All right, thank you, Matt. So again, to kind of piggyback off of the last comment that he made around measuring and having visibility to what goes on inside of the company, and then again, the same concept that we've talked about a lot, the ability to be in sync with your customer and have the same visibility and the same access provided both internally and externally through different methods is really critical. So we want to look at, if we're going to be providing self-service, we're going to be providing personalized customer support, we've obviously got to use data to make sure that we're optimizing our processes and giving customers with these complex organizations the visibility they need to be most effective as well. So, leveraging real-time data and robust reporting is really where we want to finish out and wrap up. So let's talk a little bit about some of this functionality that you should expect. Here we go. So, being able to have a system that allows you to have standardized reporting across the organization that has built-in reports that are going to be consistent with, again, whether the CFO is looking at that information, whether the divisional manager, whether the, manager of a single location, that they're not just creating their own reports to look at data to manage their services, billing, orders, again, the service levels of their providers. Ultimately, being able to have that be consistent is really critical, right? So having a system that can provide them that access to standardized reporting and for them to be able to pull that on demand, and then for the data that you're using to line up and to be driven the same exact way, keeps the conversation consistent, right? So having a standard set of reports that can be shared both internally as well as with your customer to keep everyone speaking the same language, we really see as a critical element to both the technologies that you need to implement as well as that support strategy. At the same time, having those canned reports and having standardized data is really important, but for you to be able to support organizations that are going to have unique needs, and then you as a service provider are certainly going to be unique compared to other service providers in the industry, the ability to be able to create on-demand custom reports to get data out of the systems that you're using to ultimately give you the intelligence to make better decisions, right? The ability to manage, like you heard Matt mention, churn, right? What service offerings are being most adopted by our largest customers, right? So how do we provide more marketing and how do we provide more awareness around those services, both to our sales team as well as to our support organization to do what Matt talked about, which is expand inside of those accounts, which 4 to 5x greater multiple in terms of valuation is obviously a huge impact, right? And then how do I look at things like, again, product adoption? How do I look at volume of my orders? How do I manage the service level agreements that I'm providing to enterprise customers? Which of my support agents is doing the best job so I can make sure with data I put the right people with the right accounts. And then again, being able to tailor data to your customers' needs so that they have that accessible on demand, right? Really having a system that has that incorporated and has the flexibility to do that, we see as a critical element to not only winning but retaining these types of accounts. So again, to summarize, what we see is a huge opportunity in the market. Our clients that are taking advantage of this are again growing at double the rate of those that aren't. But there's challenges in winning and supporting this segment, and you need the right technology. You have to have a focused support strategy, and you have to have the infrastructure in place, before you bring on a client like this. And then you need the information to make sure that you're optimizing that relationship, right? So have the right technologies, have a clear personalized support strategy, and have the ability to get data on demand are things that we see are critical to winning in this segment.
Thank you, Evan and Matt. That concludes the presentation segment of today's webinar. We'd like to answer a few questions from the audience before we end today. The first question is for you, Evan. How are your clients finding larger enterprise opportunities?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for asking that. So I think a lot of them are being brought in by companies that already have the relationship, right? When you look at an upmarket, not just a Fortune 500, right? But you look at a 30, 40, 50, 100 location, $5,000 to $10,000 to $25,000 a month customer in communication spend. They're going to have relationships with existing vendors and existing partners, and being able to have that trust is really critical for a company like that that's going to make a change. So, we see that they're heavily leveraging the agent community, right, and really making sure, again, it kind of comes back to the same needs that an enterprise customer is going to have. The ability to support that type of agent that has the relationship. Obviously, that relationship with that customer is critical to them, just as critical as it is to you. They're going to want that same type of visibility into that account, right? They're going to want self-service. They're going to want to be able to see what's going on with that customer's orders. They're going to want to know what's going on with support with that customer. And if you can demonstrate that to them, that here's the functionality I'm going to give you so that you're kept in the loop, that you have real-time information, that ultimately builds that trust with that partner that's going to give them the confidence to bring you into an account like that, right? So it's a very similar requirements in serving the agent community that has relationships with these accounts are the ability to provide them self-service and on-demand visibility.
Great. There's another question for you, Evan. Here's the question. I have a customer that has several locations and they want to receive their usage by location. Is there a way to do this other than manually creating a report?
There is. So we have a couple different versions of our customer portal. The enterprise version has the ability to manage multi-account hierarchy and be able to provide that visibility through an online view so that customers can just go on. They can rename services. They can provide different levels of access inside of their company. So that way each user can just see the usage at their respective location, but then whoever's managing that centrally can have access to everything. Also, Rev.io allows you to provide management reports on the statements that you send to your customers, so that will have a breakdown of every single location and their usage and recurring and non-recurring billing by location. So you wouldn't need to pull a report for that. You actually can have live on-demand access to that through the customer portal that your internal users have access to, as well as the customer users have access to, and then we have that capability on the billing as well.
Great. This one's for you, Matt. How does your strategy differ when managing your largest customers?
Yeah, so I touched on a couple of these, but maybe I can outline the most important ones in my mind. I think kind of first and foremost, having executive alignment. And what that means to me is that, that direct connection from original purchaser stakeholder to their counterpart inside our organization is an open and an available channel. And I think I would kind of extend that further by saying just providing a lot of access to the organization. I would be open with a lot of the processes and timelines and things that are designed to support customers. I think the more transparency around how your organization does things and does things specifically to support them is critical to maintaining a healthy relationship. Maybe third is an escalation path, both during normal business hours and after business hours. Where do I go when, there is an emergency, or is there something that requires a different kind of attention? And then fourth, I think, again, I said this during my piece, but knowing their long-term plans, so asking the questions about where they're planning to be, desiring to be in 3, 6, 9, even 12 months, I think is critical to aligning any number of things from our own internal, plans around how we plan to support them, extensions in our staff. Just that awareness alone can be influential in how your own organization is designed around supporting them. So that's how I'd answer that.
Great. Evan, I think I'll ask you to answer our last question today. Our audience member said, I have an account that has 5 regional offices that all receive bills for 8 to 10 locations each, but the corporate office doesn't receive the bills and they want information about the total spent. How can we provide this to our customer?
Okay, so hopefully I'm understanding this right, that there's 5 different regional areas that have multiple locations underneath them. Each of them are responsible for that kind of relative grouping of locations, but then there's some corporate office elsewhere that actually doesn't pay that bill, but at least wants visibility to the holistic spend. So yeah, you can accomplish that inside of Enterprise Customer Portal. You have the ability through Rev.io to bill multiple parent-child segments. So you would have each one of those 5 regional offices would be a parent. Those individual locations that roll up to each of those offices would be children. And then inside of Enterprise Portal, you can actually have multiple parent-child relationships and have that data displayed. So that corporate office could have a login to be able to see each one of those 5 parent-child structures, and they can actually break that up to have that kind of roll up however they want in terms of grouping that spend together and how they display that data. And they could certainly easily see just the aggregate total of everything. So that is a kind of a core concept of the customer portal that we provide, that we allow our service providers to provide to their customers. So that would allow them to do what you're talking about.
Excellent. That wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.